As the stars twinkle softly in the night sky, let your mind drift, letting each word draw you closer to the realm of dreams. Tonight, we journey to a distant village, one filled with ancient whispers and mysteries of a dragon's heart. A tale passed down through ages, speaking of magic and secrets hidden in the shadows. Picture the warmth of a quiet hearth, where stories are told in hushed tones, and where a young apprentice named Elara embarks on a quest to uncover the truth of an old legend. Relax, breathe deeply, and let the gentle flow of the story carry you into a restful sleep as we begin. In the forgotten corners of every kingdom, there are tales so old, so buried in the dust of time, that only whispers remain. One such tale lingered in the shadowed alleys and quiet hearths of Elara's village. A story told with hushed voices, speaking of a stone said to hold the very essence of a dragon's heart. A fragment of a creature long lost to the world, yet forever alive within the stone. It was called the Dragon Stone, a relic of unimaginable power that granted dominion over the elements to whoever possessed it. Elara, a young apprentice to the village scribe, had always been drawn to such stories. Unlike the others who dismissed them as mere legends, she believed there was more hidden in the folds of ancient lore than most dared to consider. The scrolls she tended to day after day only deepened her curiosity. Each fragile page seemed to contain clues to something far greater than her small world. And then, one day, the scroll that would change everything slipped into her hands. A forgotten text, barely legible, written in a language that danced on the edge of memory. The passage spoke of a dragon's heart, not in metaphor, but in chilling detail. A stone, forged from the heart of the last dragon, can command the winds, stir the oceans, and shake the very earth. Elara's fingers trembled as she traced the faded ink. The words, though worn with time, seemed to hum with a life of their own. It was as if the scroll had waited for her, waited for someone who believed in the impossible. The wind howled outside the small stone chamber, rattling the shutters as if urging her to hurry. But Elara was frozen in place, her heart racing as the reality of the words sank in. Could the Dragonstone truly exist? And if so, where had it been hidden all these centuries? Her mind spun with possibilities, but before she could dwell too long on the matter, her master entered the room, his heavy footfalls echoing on the stone floor. Elara quickly tucked the scroll away, heart pounding in her chest. Her master, an elderly man with more interest in keeping the kingdom's records than deciphering old myths, barely glanced in her direction. "The winter inventories need sorting," he grumbled, his voice rough as parchment. Elara nodded absent-mindedly, still lost in the haze of her discovery. The Dragonstone, a heart still alive with the power of the elements. Her hands itched to return to the scroll, to decipher more of its secrets. But she knew she had to be careful. This knowledge, this power, if it was true, could not be spoken of lightly. That night, Elara lay in her small bed beneath the rafters of her master's cottage, the scroll's words echoing in her thoughts. Sleep evaded her. She could almost hear the rumble of the dragon's breath in the darkness, feel the pulse of the stone in her hand. What if she could find it? What if the dragon stone wasn't just a myth? But even as her mind danced with the possibilities, a shadow of doubt crept in. Legends had a way of luring those who sought them into danger. No treasure came without a price. The dragon's heart, if it existed, was no simple artifact. It was a fragment of something ancient, something wild, and yet the pull of the unknown was too strong. Morning light crept through the cracks in the shutters, bathing the room in a soft golden glow. Elara made her decision. She would find the stone, no matter the cost. Her heart pounded with the weight of her resolve. She would have to be cautious, but she could not turn away from this path. Somewhere in the forgotten corners of the world, the dragonstone waited. And so, her journey began. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, as though the elements themselves had heard her decision. Elara's journey began in the silence of dawn, the world still heavy with the mist of night. She had packed only what was necessary: her master's old maps, a leather-bound journal for her thoughts, and the amulet she had inherited from her mother, a relic of her own that had always given her comfort. The scroll, with its cryptic passage about the dragonstone, she carried close to her chest, hidden beneath her cloak. As she walked the narrow forest paths that wound beyond the village, the world seemed to hold its breath. The birds did not sing, and even the rustle of the trees felt muted, as though nature itself was watching her. Elara pressed on, her steps soft on the mossy ground, her mind racing with the possibilities of what lay ahead. By midday, she reached the edge of the village's known borders, where the wildlands began. The air was thicker here, with the scent of damp earth and ancient wood. Shadows stretched long and deep, casting eerie shapes across the path. Elara pulled her cloak tighter around her shoulders, the weight of her quest beginning to sink in. It was here, at the threshold of the unknown, that she first encountered the stranger. He appeared as if conjured by the mist itself, a figure draped in a dark hooded cloak, standing motionless in the center of the path. His face was obscured, hidden in the shadow of his hood, but Elara could feel his gaze upon her. A chill ran down her spine, yet she did not stop. Something about him, his stillness, the way the mist curled around him, felt otherworldly, as if he were part of the forest itself. "You seek the dragonstone." The stranger's voice broke the silence, low and rasping, like wind through dead leaves. Elara froze, her hand instinctively reaching for the amulet at her throat. She had told no one of her quest, yet this figure seemed to know. For a moment, she considered turning back, retreating to the safety of her village. But the curiosity that had driven her this far burned brighter. Swallowing her fear, she took a step closer. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice steady, despite the unease curling in her chest. The stranger did not answer immediately. Instead, he reached into the folds of his cloak and withdrew something small and gleaming. An amulet, ancient and worn, but pulsing faintly with light. It was unlike anything Elara had ever seen, and yet it felt familiar, as if she had known it in dreams long forgotten. "This will guide you when the stars grow dim," the stranger said, holding it out to her. His voice was soft, almost a whisper, but the words echoed in her mind as though carried on the wind itself. Elara hesitated. The air around her seemed to hum with tension, as if the very elements were waiting for her to make a choice. She glanced at the amulet, then back at the stranger, trying to discern his intent. But his face remained hidden, his presence more a shadow than a man. There was no malice in him, yet there was something otherworldly, something that made her feel as though the ground beneath her feet had shifted. "What is this?" she asked, her voice quieter now. "It is not the stone you seek, but it will lead you to it if you are worthy," the stranger replied, his voice still like a breeze through the trees. "The path ahead is dark, Elara. Many have sought the Dragonstone. Few have returned." Her heart quickened at the sound of her name from his lips. She had never spoken it. How did he know? Who was this man, this being, who seemed to know her thoughts, her quest, her very soul? Before she could speak again, the stranger placed the amulet in her hand, his fingers cold as stone. The moment it touched her skin, the world around her seemed to shift. The wind picked up, swirling the mist into strange patterns, and the trees creaked, as though whispering secrets too ancient for human ears. "When the time comes," he said, stepping back into the mist, "you will understand." And just like that, he was gone. The forest, which had been still and silent moments before, seemed to exhale. The birds began to sing again, and the wind died down, leaving Elara standing alone on the path, the amulet warm in her palm. Her fingers tightened around the strange relic, its weight both comforting and foreboding. There was no turning back now. Whatever lay ahead, the stranger had given her the first key to unlocking the mystery of the Dragonstone. With a final glance at the place where he had stood, Elara continued down the path, her steps now carrying her deeper into the unknown. The forest seemed to close in around her, as though drawing her into its secrets. And somewhere, deep within the wilds, the Dragonstone awaited. The forest had an unsettling way of seeming both vast and claustrophobic. The towering trees, their twisted branches interlocking high above, blocked out the sun, leaving the path in a perpetual state of twilight. Elara felt the weight of their silent watchfulness as she continued her journey, the amulet from the stranger swinging lightly at her neck. It seemed to hum faintly, as if in tune with the very air around her, urging her forward. By the time she reached the outskirts of the wildlands, the light had begun to fade, and the temperature dropped sharply. Elara found refuge in a small clearing where a tangle of ancient stones marked what could have once been a shrine. It was there, under the cover of thick trees and surrounded by the remnants of forgotten history, that she decided to study the scroll again. The mysterious stranger's words echoed in her mind. "This will guide you when the stars grow dim." Unfolding the brittle parchment with great care, Elara traced the faded ink with her fingertips. She knew the passage by heart now, but there was something more to it. Something hidden. The night grew darker, the only light coming from the faint glow of the amulet. Its pale bluish light bathed the scroll, casting long shadows over the ancient writing. As the light flickered across the parchment, Elara noticed something strange. There, at the edge of the page, was a symbol she hadn't seen before. It wasn't inked like the rest of the text, but seemed to shimmer faintly in the amulet's glow. Her heart raced as she leaned closer. The symbol was a small, intricate design, a knotwork pattern that seemed almost alive, as if shifting beneath her gaze. With trembling hands, she touched the symbol, and the page beneath her fingers began to warm. The knotwork spread, slowly at first, until the entire parchment glowed with a strange, ethereal light. The lines and symbols on the scroll rearranged themselves, revealing something hidden beneath the words she had read so many times. A map. It wasn't a map of any place she recognized. The lines were jagged and serpentine, winding like the roots of the great trees around her. At its center, marked with an unfamiliar sigil, was a mountain shrouded in mist. The Mountain of Mists. The name echoed in her mind, though she wasn't sure where she had heard it before. Her breath caught in her throat as the amulet pulsed, its light syncing with the symbols on the map. It was no longer just a relic. It was a key, guiding her to the heart of the mystery she sought. The dragonstone was hidden there, somewhere in the folds of the mountain, waiting to be found. The wind stirred, cold and sharp, as if the forest itself disapproved of her discovery. Elara felt a shiver of unease ripple through her. She folded the scroll carefully, the map still vivid in her mind, and tucked it safely back into her satchel. The amulet's light dimmed once more, but its presence now felt heavier, its purpose clearer. She knew now where she must go, though the path ahead was as treacherous as it was unknown. The Mountain of Mists was a place spoken of only in riddles and half-forgotten tales. Some said it was cursed, others that it was sacred, a place where the veil between the world of the living and the realm of the old gods was thin. Whatever it was, Elara would soon find out. The night deepened, and Elara sat in the stillness of the clearing, her mind racing. Questions swirled in her thoughts about the stranger, the amulet, and the dragonstone itself. What was this power she sought? Could it truly command the elements, as the legend said? And what would happen to her if she found it? Before she could find answers, a sound broke the silence. Footsteps, soft but deliberate, echoed through the trees. Elara's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't alone. Gripping the amulet tightly, she rose to her feet, her pulse quickening. The footsteps grew closer, and from the darkness of the forest, a figure emerged. It was the hooded stranger, his form barely visible in the shadows. He stood at the edge of the clearing, watching her with that same unsettling stillness. "You found the map," he said, his voice a whisper carried on the wind. Elara swallowed hard, the weight of the scroll in her satchel suddenly feeling heavier. "Yes," she replied, her voice steady despite the fear twisting in her gut. The stranger took a step closer, though his face remained hidden in the shadows of his hood. "The mountain of mist calls to you now, but be warned, Elara. The path to the stone is not just one of trials. It is a path of transformation. Once you begin, there is no going back." Elara's grip tightened around the amulet. "I'm not afraid," she said, though her voice faltered slightly. The stranger inclined his head, as though acknowledging her bravery, or perhaps her foolishness. "Then you are ready. But remember, not everything you face on this journey will be what it seems." And with that, the stranger vanished once more into the night, leaving Elara standing alone in the clearing, her heart pounding in her chest. The mountain of mist awaited, and with it, the secrets of the dragonstone. The mountain of mists loomed before Elara, like a forgotten sentinel of the earth, his peak swallowed by swirling clouds that seemed to whisper of ancient secrets. She had travelled for days through dense forests and barren plains, with only the amulet's faint glow to guide her. Now standing at the base of the mountain, the weight of her quest pressed heavily on her shoulders. The air here was thick, tinged with the scent of sulphur and something older, something primal. As she stepped onto the mountain path, the earth beneath her feet felt warm, unnaturally so, as if the mountain itself held a pulse, a heartbeat deep within its core. The wind shifted, carrying with it the faintest scent of smoke. Elara's heart quickened. This was no ordinary place, and she knew without a doubt that the first trial lay ahead, the trial of fire. The path wound steeply upward, cutting through jagged rocks that glowed faintly in the dim light. As she ascended, the temperature rose steadily, the heat pressing against her skin. Soon, the air became oppressive. Waves of heat shimmering before her, distorting the landscape. It wasn't long before she saw the flames. They danced across the path like living creatures, tall and fierce, their flickering tendrils stretching toward the sky. The fire didn't seem to come from any visible source. It simply existed, a wall of flame blocking her way. Elara stopped, the heat already burning against her skin from a distance. She had expected challenges, but the sight of this living fire unnerved her. How could she pass through such a thing unscathed? The amulet at her neck pulsed, its cool light a stark contrast to the inferno ahead. Elara wrapped her fingers around it, feeling the steady thrum of energy that seemed to resonate with her heartbeat. She closed her eyes, focusing on the rhythm, trying to calm the storm of thoughts swirling in her mind. This will guide you when the stars grow dim. The stranger's words echoed in her thoughts, cryptic yet filled with meaning. She knew the amulet was key, but how? The flames were alive, wild, and unforgiving, and her path was blocked by their relentless fury. Taking a deep breath, Elara stepped closer, the heat searing her skin. Sweat dripped from her brow as the fire seemed to rise higher, roaring in her ears. And then, in the flicker of the flames, she saw something. Shapes dancing within the fire, figures twisting and turning in the blaze. They weren't human, yet they moved with purpose, with intent. Fire spirits, perhaps, guardians of the mountain's ancient secrets. The flames swirled, and for a moment, she thought she saw eyes watching her from within the fire. Eyes filled with something like curiosity. Her hand tightened around the amulet, and as she did, she felt a shift within herself. A sudden, inexplicable connection to the fire. The flames no longer seemed wild and uncontrollable. Instead, they danced in rhythm with her heartbeat, as though they were waiting for her command. A realization bloomed in her mind, sudden and clear. The elements were not her enemy. They were part of her journey, part of the test. Taking a deep breath, Elara stepped forward, her hand still clasped around the amulet. The fire roared, but she did not flinch. As she walked closer, the flames began to part, bending away from her like tall grass in the wind. It was as though the fire recognized her, acknowledged her. And in that moment, she understood the first truth of the Dragonstone. It was not about conquering the elements, but understanding them, becoming one with them. With every step, the fire grew calmer, and by the time she reached the center of the flames, they no longer burned hot against her skin. Instead, they wrapped around her like a warm breeze, their fierce light dimming into a soft glow. Elara's breath came in shallow gasps, but she didn't stop. The path beyond the fire was clear now, illuminated by the gentle light of the flames that once sought to consume her. When she finally emerged on the other side of the inferno, the air was cool again, the oppressive heat gone. She paused, turning to look back at the wall of fire, which had returned to its wild state, roaring and crackling as though nothing had changed. But something had changed. Elara could feel it deep within her, a newfound understanding of the element she had just faced. Fire was no longer a force to fear, but one to respect, to harness when needed. She touched the amulet again, its cool surface a reminder of the stranger's cryptic gift. Whatever lay ahead, she knew that the trials would only grow more difficult. But she had passed the first, and the path continued to rise. As she turned to continue her ascent, the mountains seemed to shift beneath her feet, as if acknowledging her victory. The sky above darkened, and the mist that clung to the peak grew thicker. Somewhere within the swirling clouds, the dragonstone awaited. But before she could claim it, there were more trials to face, more elements to understand. Elara took a deep breath and pressed onward, her resolve stronger than ever. The trial of fire was only the beginning. The mountain's ascent became steeper as Elara pressed forward, the weight of the trial of fire still heavy on her shoulders. The air cooled as she climbed, the oppressive heat fading into a damp chill. Clouds thickened above, and the wind carried the scent of rain. Soon, she found herself standing before the edge of a shimmering lake, its surface so still it mirrored the sky above. Yet the reflection was distorted, rippling as though stirred by invisible forces. Elara knew immediately. This was the next trial, the trial of water. The lake stretched far into the horizon, an endless mirror reflecting not just the world, but something deeper, something hidden beneath its glassy surface. There was no path around it, no way forward except through the water itself. Elara hesitated at the shore, her eyes drawn to the strange distortions that danced across the reflection. The air was thick with moisture, and the silence was oppressive, as if the mountain itself was waiting for her to act. Her fingers brushed the amulet at her neck, the familiar pulse of its cool energy steadying her. The trial of fire had taught her to trust the elements, to become one with them. But water was different, deceptive in its calm, yet deadly in its depths. She stepped closer, feeling the chill of the lake reach out to her as mist rose from the surface. The first step into the water was like walking through a dream. The liquid clung to her boots, cool and soft, but with each step, it became more difficult to move, as though the water was thickening, resisting her progress. She pressed on, determined, until the water reached her knees. A soft, eerie glow began to emanate from the depths, casting strange shadows beneath her. The surface remained still, but beneath something stirred, something ancient and watchful. Elara paused, her breath shallow. The lake was no ordinary body of water. It seemed to hum with life, a deep, resonant vibration that echoed through her bones. Her reflection, once clear, had begun to blur, the edges of her form shifting and bending. She felt a strange pull from below, as if the lake itself was trying to draw her in, to claim her. Trust the elements. The thought, born of her encounter with the fire, surfaced in her mind. She couldn't fight the water, not as she had tried to resist the flames. She had to move with it, to let it guide her. Closing her eyes, Elara took a deep breath and relaxed, allowing her body to float in the water's embrace. Immediately, the pull lessened, and the strange resistance began to ease. The amulet pulsed against her chest, its light now faintly reflecting off the water's surface, and she felt the shift, a subtle current that had been hidden beneath the stillness. It swirled around her, gentle yet insistent, guiding her deeper into the lake. As she allowed the current to carry her, the surface of the water began to change. The lake, once a perfect mirror, now showed a world beneath, a reflection not of the sky, but of something ancient and unseen. Towers of coral-like stone rose from the depths, glowing with an ethereal light. Strange creatures swam in the dark water, their forms barely visible, but their presence undeniable. It was a hidden realm, a world of water and shadow, existing just below the surface of reality. The current grew stronger, drawing Elara toward the center of the lake. She drifted willingly now, her fear replaced by awe. The lake was alive, its waters swirling in patterns that spoke of ancient magic. But as she approached the center, the current became more erratic, shifting unpredictably. A whirlpool began to form beneath her, its dark mouth yawning wide, pulling at her with increasing force. Panic gripped her. The calm serenity of the water had given way to chaos, and the whirlpool threatened to drag her into its depths. She reached for the amulet, clutching it tightly, and whispered a silent plea for guidance. The amulet's light flared, bright and cold, and in that moment, she understood what she needed to do. With a deep breath, Elara let go of her resistance. She stopped struggling against the pull of the water and allowed herself to sink, trusting that the amulet would guide her. The whirlpool swallowed her whole, the world above disappearing in a rush of dark water. For a moment, everything was silent. The pressure of the water pressed in on her, but she was no longer afraid. The light of the amulet cut through the darkness, and slowly the pull of the whirlpool lessened. She found herself floating in the still, quiet depths of the lake, the current now gentle once more. And then, from the darkness, a form began to take shape. A massive creature, its body serpentine and shimmering like liquid silver, rose from the deep. Its eyes, glowing with the same cold light as the amulet, regarded her with a quiet intelligence. This was no ordinary beast. It was a guardian, ancient and powerful. a spirit of the water. The creature circled her slowly, its gaze never leaving hers. Elara felt the weight of its presence, the ancient magic that bound it to the lake. It was testing her, waiting for something, though she did not know what. Finally, as if satisfied, the creature dipped its head in a slow, graceful bow, and the water around her began to lighten. The whirlpool dissolved, the lake returned to its calm reflection, and Elara found herself standing once more at the water's edge, the path ahead of her clear. She had passed the trial of water, but its mysteries lingered in her mind like ripples on the surface. She took a deep breath, the chill of the lake still clinging to her skin, and continued her journey up the mountain. There were more trials ahead, and each step brought her closer to the Dragonstone and the secrets it held. Elara's journey up the mountain of mists had grown stranger with each passing step, as though the very world she traversed was slipping between the cracks of reality. The trial of water had left her both awed and wary, for the elements were no longer just forces of nature. They were alive, watching, testing her. The path twisted upward now, steeper and narrower, leading her into a dense forest where the trees rose impossibly high, their trunks gnarled and twisted like the bones of forgotten giants. The air here was thick, almost heavy with an ancient presence. Every step Elara took was muffled by the soft, moss-covered ground, and the silence pressed in around her like a living thing. But this silence was not one of peace. It felt as though the earth beneath her feet was holding its breath, waiting, whispering secrets she could not yet hear. She paused, the amulet at her neck growing heavier. There was no clear path ahead, only the thick tangle of trees and vines, their roots twisting like veins beneath the earth. And then she heard it. A faint sound, so soft it might have been mistaken for the wind. A whisper, too quiet to be understood, but unmistakably there, rising from the ground itself. Elara knelt, pressing her hand to the earth. The whispers grew louder, though they were still fragmented, like voices carried on a distant breeze. She couldn't make out the words, but there was something in the tone, something that sent a shiver down her spine. It wasn't malice, but it was not welcoming either. The earth was alive here, ancient and wise, and it was judging her just as the fire and water had done before. As she stood, the ground beneath her feet trembled ever so slightly. It was subtle but undeniable, like the slow awakening of something deep below. The trees seemed to shift, their branches creaking as though whispering amongst themselves. Elara glanced around, her senses alert, waiting for the next trial to reveal itself. And then the earth moved. It wasn't violent at first, just a soft rumble that sent ripples through the ground, but it quickly grew stronger. The trees groaned, their roots pulling against the soil as the forest seemed to sway. Elara staggered, her feet slipping on the uneven ground as the earth beneath her buckled and shifted. The whispers grew louder now, surrounding her from every direction, voices rising in a strange, rhythmic chant. Before she could steady herself, the ground erupted in front of her. Great mounds of earth rose up, twisting into shapes that resembled figures. Tall, imposing forms made of soil and stone, their eyes hollow but watching. They towered over her, silent and motionless, like ancient guardians carved from the very bones of the mountain. Elara's heart raced. The trial had begun. The figures of earth stood between her and the path forward, their presence as immovable as the mountain itself. She took a tentative step forward, but as soon as her foot touched the ground, the earth trembled violently. The guardians stirred, their heads turning slowly to regard her. The whispers in the earth rose to a fevered pitch, their tone no longer quiet but filled with urgency. Elara understood. The trial was not about brute strength or power. It was about listening, about understanding the language of the earth itself. She knelt again, pressing both hands to the ground this time. The tremors eased slightly, and the whispers softened, though they were still fragmented, as though the earth was speaking in riddles. She closed her eyes, focusing on the steady pulse of the amulet, feeling the rhythm of the earth beneath her palms. The guardians of soil and stone watched her closely, unmoving, but no longer threatening. Elara breathed deeply, allowing herself to feel the connection between her and the land. It was not unlike the water's current, not unlike the fire's flame. It was alive but older, slower, more patient. The earth did not burn or crash. It waited, growing in silence until the time was right. Slowly, carefully, Elara rose to her feet, her hands still outstretched as if seeking balance. The earth beneath her was no longer trembling violently, but the ground shifted and rippled like waves under the surface of a calm lake. The figures of stone seemed to nod, their silent approval given as the whispers faded into the background. She took another step forward, and the earth did not rebel. The guardians stood aside, their stone eyes watching her with ancient understanding. Elara felt the weight of their gaze as she passed between them, the path ahead now clear. The trial hadn't been one of destruction or force, but of harmony, of finding her place within the rhythm of the earth itself. As she left the forest behind, the mountain began to rise sharply once more, the air thinning as she climbed higher. But Elara felt a new strength within her, a deeper understanding of the trials she faced. The elements were not mere obstacles, they were teachers, and she was learning their lessons one by one. Ahead, the mist thickened, and the mountain peak, shrouded in clouds, beckoned. The dragon stone was closer now, its power calling to her like a distant echo. But the final trials were yet to come, and the path forward was far from easy. Elara touched the amulet at her neck, feeling its familiar pulse, and pressed onward into the mist. The air grew thin as Elara ascended further up the mountain, and with each step, the world around her seemed to dissolve into the mist. The towering trees of the lower forest had long disappeared, leaving only a barren landscape of rock and stone. The path narrowed, twisting dangerously close to steep cliffs where the abyss yawned open beneath her. The wind was different here, no longer a gentle breeze, but a restless force, constantly shifting, tugging at her cloak and whispering in her ear like a forgotten voice. The mist thickened, swirling in intricate patterns, and the sky above was hidden behind a veil of cloud. Elara could no longer see the peak, but she could feel its presence, distant and looming, like a secret waiting to be unveiled. The air crackled with energy, the same strange hum she had felt at the trials of fire, water, and earth. She knew the next test was near, the trial of air. As if on cue, the wind began to howl. It swept through the narrow pass, whipping at her with sudden violence, sending loose rocks skittering across the path. Elara staggered, pressing herself against the side of the mountain to keep her balance. The wind howled again, louder this time, as though the mountain itself was alive, its breath furious and wild. She looked up and saw them, twisting forms within the mist, barely visible but unmistakably there. Figures spun through the air, their bodies shifting with the gusts of wind, moving as though they were part of the storm itself. They danced in the gale, their forms fluid and ever-changing, like the very essence of the wind come to life. The air spirits. Elara had heard of them in old tales, beings made of wind and sky, neither wholly good nor evil, but bound to the will of the air. And now they were her final trial. She could feel their eyes, though they had none, upon her, watching her every movement, testing her resolve. The wind roared again, and this time it lifted her off her feet, tossing her into the air like a leaf caught in a storm. She gasped as the ground vanished beneath her, and for a terrifying moment, she was weightless, suspended in the swirling mist. The amulet at her neck flared with cold light, its pulse erratic, as if struggling to anchor her in place. But the wind would not allow her to fall. Instead, it cradled her, pulling her higher into the swirling fog, where the air spirits danced. They circled her, their forms twisting and flowing like smoke in the breeze, their laughter ringing faintly through the storm. They were testing her, toying with her, as they had done with countless others who had dared climb this far. Elara struggled to regain her composure. The trial of air was not one she could face with force, nor with resistance. The fire had taught her to temper power. The water had shown her the value of surrender, and the earth had demanded understanding. But the air, this element was different. It did not wish to be understood or tamed. It was freedom itself, wild and boundless. Her heart pounded in her chest as she let go of her fear. She had to move with the wind, not fight it. Taking a deep breath, she closed her eyes and relaxed, her body becoming weightless again, trusting the currents to carry her. The moment she surrendered, the wind shifted, no longer chaotic but controlled, as if it had accepted her offering. The air spirits seemed to sense the change in her, for they slowed their wild dance, their laughter softening. They circled her in graceful arcs, their forms melding with the wind. Elara floated with them, her body in perfect harmony with the air, moving as they moved, a part of the storm. She felt the wind beneath her, not as an adversary, but as an ally. The mist parted, revealing the sky above, a brilliant expanse of deep blue, unmarred by clouds. The sun shone brightly, casting its light on the mountain peak ahead. Elara felt herself descend gently to the ground, her feet touching the rocky path once more. The wind, once violent and erratic, now swirled gently around her, carrying the faintest whisper of approval. The air spirits were gone, their dance finished, but the trial had been passed. The amulet at her neck glowed softly, its pulse steady once again. Elara stood on the edge of the mountain, gazing toward the peak, the final destination that awaited her. The path ahead was clear now, and she knew that the hardest part of her journey was yet to come. The Dragonstone was near, its presence a faint but undeniable pull, like the heartbeat of the mountain itself. But with each trial she faced, Elara grew stronger, her connection to the elements deepening, her understanding of the ancient forces sharpening. She took a deep breath, the wind still cool against her skin, and began the final ascent. The sky above watched, silent and vast, as she pressed onward toward the heart of the mountain and the power that awaited her. The final steps to the mountain's peak were a journey through silence. Elara had passed through fire, water, earth, and air, each element revealing a piece of the mystery she sought. Now, as the summit came into view, the wind died, the mists fell away, and the world grew still. It was an eerie stillness, the kind that settled before something profound. The peak of the mountain of mists was not sharp or jagged as she had imagined. Instead, it opened into a wide plateau, barren, save for a single ancient structure carved from the living rock of the mountain itself. The stone was smooth, polished by time, and the walls were etched with markings that seemed to shift in the light. It was a chamber, hidden from the eyes of the world, waiting for someone to arrive. Elara's heart pounded as she stepped closer. She could feel the pull of the Dragonstone, an unseen force tugging at her very being. The amulet around her neck vibrated faintly, as if resonating with the power that lay within. This was the place, the final destination of her journey. She approached the entrance to the chamber cautiously, her hand trailing along the cool stone. As she crossed the threshold, the air inside was thick with ancient energy, a weight pressing down on her, though not unkindly. The room was bathed in a faint golden glow that seemed to emanate from the very walls. And there, at the center, resting on a low pedestal, was a dragonstone. It was smaller than she had expected, roughly the size of her palm, and yet it pulsed with a deep inner light. The stone's surface was smooth, with veins of fiery red and molten gold coursing through it like blood. It was as if the heart of a dragon still beat within, alive with the power of the elements. Elara stared at it, her breath caught in her throat. Here it was, the thing she had sought, the legend brought to life. But as she stepped closer, she heard it. A voice, not of a human tongue, but something older, deeper. It was not a sound she heard with her ears, but one she felt in the marrow of her bones. The voice of the dragon. It whispered to her, not with words, but with an overwhelming sense of presence. It was not a simple object of power she stood before, but the remnant of something vast, something beyond her comprehension. You seek the heart of the dragon, the voice seemed to say, though it was more a feeling than a phrase. But do you know the cost of such power? Elara swallowed hard. She had journeyed far, faced trials she could not have imagined, all for this moment. And yet now, standing before the Dragonstone, she realized that the true challenge was not the trial she had endured, but the choice she now faced. The power of the elements, of fire, water, earth, and air, all bound within this stone. Could she truly wield it? Should she? She took a step closer, and as she did, the stone's glow intensified, bathing the chamber in light. Her heart raced. The power was palpable, alive, and waiting for her. But with that power came a weight, an ancient responsibility. The air shifted beside her, and suddenly, the hooded stranger appeared, as if he had always been there, standing in the shadows. His presence, as before, was both unsettling and familiar. He said nothing, only watched her with eyes that glittered beneath the shadow of his hood. "You've come this far," he finally spoke, his voice as soft and ancient as the wind itself. "The Dragonstone waits for you, but do you understand what it is you ask of it?" Elara hesitated, her gaze flickering between the stranger and the stone. "I came to find it, to uncover its power," she said, though the words felt hollow now. The closer she stood to the stone, the more she understood the weight of her quest. But what is the cost? What happens if I take it? The stranger tilted his head, his expression unreadable. Power comes with a price. The elements are not bound lightly, nor do they bend to human will without consequence. The stone can grant you the power to control them, but it will ask something of you in return. Elara's heart pounded in her chest, the weight of the choice settling upon her. She had come so far, but the true test was not one of strength or endurance. It was one of wisdom, of knowing when to take and when to walk away. The Dragonstone pulsed with light, as though calling out to her. But its voice was not a demand. It was a question. "What will it take?" she asked quietly. The stranger's eyes seemed to glow faintly beneath his hood. "That is for you to decide. The stone is not simply a tool. It is a bond with the elements themselves. If you claim its power, you must bear its burden. The forces of the world are not to be controlled. They are to be balanced." Elara closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the moment. She had come seeking power, but now, faced with the dragonstone's raw energy, she understood what it truly meant. The choice was hers, and it would define not only her future, but the fate of everything she touched. Slowly she opened her eyes, and with trembling hands, she reached for the stone. Elara's fingers hovered just above the dragonstone, the warmth of its power radiating into her skin. The stone pulsed, alive with a rhythm that echoed the beating of her own heart. For a moment, time seemed to stretch, the world narrowing down to this single choice, this single breath. The ancient chamber, the mountain, even the hooded stranger, all of it faded into the background. It was just her and the stone, and the weight of the decision she had to make. The voice of the dragon echoed once more in her mind, deep and vast, like a memory from another world. It did not compel her, did not coerce. It simply asked, "Are you willing?" The question hung in the air, heavy and unyielding. The power of the elements, bound within this fragment of a dragon's heart, was within her reach. Yet, with that power came a responsibility far greater than she had ever imagined. Her mind raced, filled with memories of the trials she had endured. Fire, water, earth, and air, all had tested her, but not in the way she had expected. The trials had not been about overcoming the elements, but understanding them. They had shown her that true strength was not in domination, but in balance. She had felt it in the flames that had parted for her, in the water that had carried her, in the earth that had whispered its secrets, and in the wind that had danced with her. But now, as she stood before the heart of the dragon, the question was no longer about what she had learned. It was about who she would become. The hooded stranger watched her in silence, his presence a shadow at the edge of her vision. He had guided her to this moment, but he offered no counsel, no warning. His role was not to decide for her, but to witness her choice. The amulet at her neck pulsed in time with the dragonstone, a steady rhythmic beat that seemed to merge with her own pulse. Elara's hand trembled as she lowered it toward the stone, her breath catching in her throat. She could feel the weight of the future pressing down on her, the knowledge that once she touched the stone, there would be no going back. The power of the elements would be hers to wield. But at what cost? In that moment, she understood. The dragonstone was not a gift. It was a bond, a covenant with the forces of the world. If she took its power, she would be bound to it, and to the elements themselves. It was not simply a tool to be used, but a living force, a part of the earth itself. To command the elements meant becoming part of them, losing a piece of herself to the power she sought to wield. Her fingers brushed the surface of the stone, and instantly, the world around her shifted. Visions flooded her mind, visions of firestorms raging across the land, rivers swelling and flooding entire villages, mountains crumbling into dust, and winds tearing through cities. She saw the chaos that unchecked power could unleash, the devastation that could follow if the elements were wielded without balance, without care. And then she saw something else, peace. She saw fields blooming with life after a gentle rain, the warmth of the sun nurturing crops. Rivers flowing steady and clear, the earth solid beneath her feet. She saw harmony, the elements working in concert to sustain the world. The power of the dragonstone was not just destruction, but creation. It was a force that could heal as much as it could harm. Her hand stilled, hovering just above the stone. The vision faded, leaving her standing once more in the quiet chamber. The air was still, the stone pulsing faintly beneath her fingertips, waiting. The choice was hers. To take the stone was to wield the power of the elements, but it also meant bearing the responsibility of that power. It was not a choice to be made lightly. Elara drew in a slow, steady breath, her mind clear. She understood now. The dragonstone was not meant to be taken for personal gain, not meant to be controlled. It was meant to be protected, to be a guardian of the balance between the elements and the world. The true power lay not in using the stone, but in safeguarding it, ensuring that the harmony of the elements was never disrupted. With a final, steadying breath, Elara withdrew her hand. She would not take the stone. The chamber seemed to sigh with relief, the air lightening around her. The dragonstone pulsed once more, its light fading to a soft glow. The hooded stranger stepped forward, his presence no longer ominous, but calm. There was a faint smile on his lips, as if he had known all along what choice she would make. "You have chosen wisely," he said softly, his voice like a breeze through ancient leaves. "The power of the dragonstone is not for mortals to wield. It is meant to protect, to balance the forces of the world. You have proven yourself a true guardian." Elara nodded, the weight of her decision settling over her like a mantle. She felt no regret, no hesitation. She had come seeking power, but had found something far greater, understanding. The elements were not hers to command, but hers to honor and protect. As the stranger faded into the shadows once more, Elara turned and walked out of the chamber, the weight of her journey behind her and a new path ahead. The mountain was silent now, its trials complete, and the dragonstone for another age would remain undisturbed. The wind whispered softly as she descended, carrying with it the echoes of her journey. And in the distance, the mountain stood tall, watching over the world in silence, as it had done for centuries, guarding the heart of the dragon.